When we talk about sci-fi or horror that makes out like a supernatural and/or extraterrestrial event is actually real, we're usually talking about found footage movies like the Blair Witch Project, which, as well as going the extra mile and making itself look like it was made by a bunch of amateur documentary makers wandering around a wood somewhere, the marketing team started spreading promotional material that made out like the actors involved were actually missing in order to heighten this narrative that what we're watching is genuinely the last known footage of these people. You can call this a cheap publicity stunt if you want, and that is essentially what it was, but there is just something extra alluring to viewers when you attach the idea that a seemingly supernatural and/or horrific thing that you're watching is real. Hell, that's the same reason why ghost sighting videos and conspiracy theory stuff about aliens and shit like that are such popular topics on YouTube. There's something inside of us that just wants to believe that there's more to life than boring everyday grind, and the idea that this stuff's real is just exciting to us. And you can harness that thought that it might be real to make for incredibly compelling horror experiences. Of course, Blair Witch Project is far from the first case of a piece of horror fiction convincing its viewers that it's real, either purposefully or accidentally. And found footage is far from the only way of trying to convince someone that a piece of disturbing content is real. One of the most interesting examples of sci-fi and horror media with a heightened sense of artificial realism attached to it is Ghostwatch, one of the most controversial things that the BBC has ever put out. It was a made-for-TV horror movie that styled itself as a magazine documentary program supposedly going out live, and it engineered sinister in and out of studio events over the course of the runtime. It reportedly drew over 30,000 calls to the BBC in a single hour, and it's always said to have caused PTSD in some children, but if you actually look into it, this was only ever suggested, it was never actually diagnosed. Although the fact that nugget of information about Ghostwatch is so persistent does hint at some level of pride there. I mean, of course you shouldn't be proud that you caused someone such an extreme level of distress, but it just sounds impressive when you say it. My show was so scary that it gave people PTSD. The point of horror is to scare people, so if it's gone that far, you've kind of done your job. Of course, Ghostwatch has noticeably aged quite badly, but the reason for that is because it was specifically made for the broadcasting environment of BBC One in 1992. They made it seem like an innocuous bit of light entertainment filler before they hit you with the supernatural broadcast interruptions later in the runtime. Sure, it seems corny by today's standards, but for the time it wouldn't have looked that out of place on BBC One, and so the surprise would have worked for audiences back then. Because the only identifying factor that what you're watching is indeed a fictional narrative are the end credits. Of course, the acting in it is quite bad and corny. Most people in it are TV presenters and not actors after all. But that actually adds to its effect, because it's trying to adopt the sense of artificial realism that most light entertainment does have anyway. Light entertainment is engineered, and it's because of that it always kinda feels unreal anyway. A part of your brain is aware as you watch it that this isn't how ordinary people talk to each other. Live television is heavily choreographed, and Ghostwatch is well versed in the language of this particular brand of BBC light entertainment, and the elements that they have at their disposal and the way they've used those elements is certainly impressive. Key feature of Ghostwatch was Michael Parkinson, who was one of the BBC's biggest names at the time, having worked as a talk show host for decades, and he is the obvious suggestion for a host that the BBC would float for a production like this under the assumption that it is just another piece of innocent phony Halloween night schedule filler. Parkinson and a paranormal researcher sit in the studio segments and discuss paranormal cases and take calls from members of the public, and Michael's there to chuckle and brush off any sense that this stuff is real, while the paranormal researcher sows the sense of doubt over the course of the show, leading up to its intense conclusion. Meanwhile, Sarah Green, who hosted Saturday morning magazine show Going Live at the time, spends the night in a supposedly real haunted house with a family who are being terrorised by a ghost who they've nicknamed Pipes. And you got Craig Charles, otherwise known as Lister from Red Dwarf, running around the neighbourhood and talking to the residents and making jokes. Getting all these familiar faces to do their respective things was important to the narrative that the show constructed. Ghostwatch did all it could to make the viewers of the time buy that this is all genuine and it's not just a piece of drama. And that sets us up for the perfect conclusion where the studio gets invaded by supernatural forces. Ghostwatch's magazine show framework is what makes it so effective. Take a look at this sequence here, for example, where we have it described to us how red marks started appearing on this girl's skin as a result of unseen hands.
Alan and I watched them appear on her face and throat, literally in front of our eyes. There's another shot there, look. Remarkable.
If Ghostwatch were just told like a conventional drama, you would have had a scene where the marks start appearing on the girl's skin, it would have been scary, and that would have been that. But what's so utterly genius here is that by presenting this as an anecdote with the veneer of authenticity, with just pictures and a voiceover inside the magazine framework, what that does is make it so when we actually catch the girl getting possessed on camera later in the runtime, the viewer is much more likely to believe what they're seeing. It's about 40 minutes before anything supernatural starts happening in the house. Ghostwatch builds very, very slowly, and it intercuts with all these debates between a paranormal researcher making wild and ludicrous claims, and a skeptic who pours scorn on it, and Parkinson makes fun of the researcher and makes her views seem ridiculous. This conflict is set up to encourage the viewer to take on that conflict in their own head, where you may go into the show knowing that it's bollocks and reassuring yourself that it's bollocks throughout the runtime, but the conflict's there to encourage you to go, even for just half a second, but what if it's not? The conflict is stretched out for a long time as a means of tugging that certainty that it's bullshit out of your mind. We even have a fake out scene where it gets revealed that a banging noise in the house has been faked. This bit makes out like it's meant to relieve the tension by revealing that it is all bullshit, but it actually doesn't. All that does is continue the inner conflict going on with the viewer, which gets flipped again when the daughter gets possessed, and it makes the climax in the dark house and the pitch black studio where all we've got is creepy noises and light indications of a supernatural presence all the more disturbing. And it leaves the viewer with their internal conflict between belief and skepticism that's been flipping back and forth this whole time on belief. Ghostwatch harnesses the power of doubt in an ingenious way that doesn't even require elaborate special effects. And from the complaints it got, apparently lots of people were left stuck on belief for a long time afterwards until they realised they'd been tricked. And that's when they got angry. Did the BBC really put this out and want everyone to believe that what they were watching was real? To which the obvious response is, yes, of course they bloody wanted people to believe that Ghostwatch was real. The programme makers denied this when shit hit the fan, but did anyone really buy it? At the time, the defence offered up was that it was broadcast in a drama slot, there are end credits at the end of the programme clearly giving the indication that it's not real, and I've watched coverage of the controversy from around the time and read the defences, and they're clearly choosing their words very carefully, but it's all bullshit. It's way too much of a stretch to believe that they accidentally ended up coming up with something this convincing. Realism was the entire point of disguising it as a bit of typical Halloween night schedule filler. Ghostwatch's premise was to set a trap for anyone thinking that they're about to watch some dumb shit about ghosts and nothing more than that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Art is there to generate a reaction. If you felt tricked, that was the point. Following the complaints, the Broadcasting Standards ruling had this to say. The BBC had a duty to do more than simply hint at the deception that it was practicing on its audience. In Ghostwatch, there was a deliberate attempt to cultivate a sense of menace. Yet it's a bit of horror content, it makes more of an impact that way. Ghostwatch was an ingenious pitch and it was very far ahead of its time. It was conceived around the time that the concept of reality TV was starting to take hold, and if there's one thing you can say in its favour, at least the programme makers admitted that it was fake. At least Ghostwatch was the product of incredibly talented people who knew what they were doing in engineering a believable work of television. They had a reaction that they wanted to get for artistic reasons, and they got it. They didn't try to encourage sincere belief in bullshit like so many reality shows about ghosts and aliens that have been made in the years since. The makers of Ghostwatch actually knew that it wasn't real and admitted it. Yes, we did try to make you believe that there's something there, but there isn't, alright? It's okay, there's nothing there. No, there's nothing there. What are you talking about? There's nothing. Wait, are you hearing that? Hang on a second. Hello? Hello? Oh god. I'm so sorry. Sorry, I'll get out of your house. I promise. Sorry. No.
Is dead.
Unsubscribe from my channel now.